Well, hi, everyone, and Happy New Year, and welcome to Signal360. I'm Lauren Barrick, and today we're going to speak with John Battelle, co-founder and co-editor-in-chief, and we're going to talk with him about his annual predictions. So welcome, John.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. So I think this is your 20th year of your annual predictions. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been doing this 20 straight years, which is crazy to think it's been that long. But that's when I started blogging, writing, on my own site 20 years ago, 2003.
And you've had a pretty good run on these. I mean, I think we're gonna be talking later in the month about your kind of scorecard for 2022. But I think everyone, if you don't even have a pen and paper yet, go grab one because you're going to want to take down some notes for 2023. John has a pretty good track record.
Yeah, I had a good year last year. Let's see if we can keep it going.
Definitely. All right, so I read through them, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I felt like they had a little bit of a positive spin this year.
That's not wrong, and it's generally true. As a matter of fact, there's been a couple of years where I've reviewed like the first draft of my predictions, and I'm like, I'm being too positive, and then I go back and sort of, mess them up a bit, so to speak, and then I end up being wrong. So I'm going to stick with my gut here. I tend to be a pretty optimistic person, even though, I'm a journalist, which means I'm supposed to be cynical.
Yeah, I get that. Well, I want to start right off at the top because your first one's definitely got an interesting bend, and I think it's also sort of definitely a positive one. And you start talking right off the bat about one of the big companies out there, or you're saying that will become sort of get a business model, which is ChatGPT. And I thought that was really interesting. So you could kind of like talk a little bit about that and where you sort of imagine this going for 2023.
So, ChatGPT, burst on the scene a month or two ago, and prior to that, it had an image generator that got a lot of attention. But it really was its text generation feature, the ChatGPT, where you could prompt it and then it would come back pretty quickly with a chunk of text that sounded like, basically there was somebody behind the screen who was a sentient person writing stuff for you. And of course, the press, being generally writers, went bonkers for this. And so we saw so much coverage of this breakout artificial intelligence application. But the question for me anyways was, well, okay, but where's the business in all of this? And the company that made ChatGPT is really kind of not a company. It's a nonprofit research laboratory called OpenAI. But what a lot of people didn't really note when they were covering ChatGPT is that OpenAI had changed their business model to become a for-profit company. And not only that, the original technology and a number of the original researchers came from Google, and the big round of financing that valued the company at over $20 billion came from Microsoft. So here we're talking about two titans of technology who are deeply embedded into a new company with a lot of other well-known people who have been involved in the OpenAI effort, and a big mission, a very positive mission, which is, in essence, to figure out how to do artificial intelligence in a way that doesn't harm humanity. So here is a big Silicon Valley story with all of the elements, lots of money, lots of well-known backers, a big, open-ended, optimistic mission. So my first prediction and my second and third really have to do with how does ChatGPT make it through the gauntlet of the Silicon Valley, business model, gambit, and that's really a big deal. Google didn't become Google until it figured out AdWords. And Microsoft didn't become Microsoft until it figured out software licensing, right? And both those companies, I think, are going to play a role in the future business model of ChatGPT. And I predict that this is the year where we'll see that business model emerge for all three.
How will Google react? And what is it going to be sort of producing to, have a step forward from what's happening right now with ChatGPT.
And one of the things that's really interesting about Google in the last 5 or 10 years is, well, it's been one of the most remarkably profitable, high growth companies, over the past decade. It hasn't had that many breakthrough innovations lately. It hasn't had something that make people go, wow, that's amazing. You may recall sort of 2000 to 2010, Google was throwing a lot of stuff against the wall. They were experimenting in almost every field. Now, they still have a lot of those experiments running, but they're not well known. I think they should probably be a little bit embarrassed that ChatGPT didn't come out of Google, that instead it came out sort of, a little bit to the side of Google. And I think what I predict is that they're going to come up with a new search interface that feels like ChatGPT. A lot of the first hot takes on ChatGPT were, oh my goodness, this is going to hurt Google's search business model, because now you can have this conversational interface with an intelligent agent and have that answer come to you not from a bunch of blue links that come from Google, but instead a better answer that is sort of assembled from the internet using ChatGPT. Well, ChatGPT can't really do that right now. Its database is based on information gleaned from the internet before 2021. Doing that at scale is insanely expensive. And there's really very few companies who can afford to do that. One of them is Google. And of course, Google means search. So I predict that Google is going to experiment with a ChatGPT-like search interface, which I just gave a moniker to it of conversational search.
Which I think is super interesting, and I think would be something that absolutely change the nature of how we use Google. I definitely think it's going to be something that might be very, very welcome.
We don't like to go back and forth when it seems like we're interacting with machines. It's called these modal dialogues. Wait, did you mean, right? But if you're talking to someone, or it feels like you're talking to someone, we'll do it forever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's been a big drawdown of what we've seen in a lot of other spaces where we're talking to, what we think are, or what we're being told are these kind of, intellectual, artificial AI conversational interfaces, and they're not necessarily what we really want to be talking to. So I'm really excited about that one, the conversational search concept. And then you also, as you had mentioned earlier, about some of the big companies out there that are going to have, how ChatGPT might have an impact on. Another one you mentioned was Microsoft. And you talked, third prediction, about what you see Microsoft, its reaction to this new kind of like player on the field. And I'd like to hear a little bit about that. You talked about something you pinged as, which I love, E2, Enterprise Explorer. And maybe you can just talk a little bit about that too.
Of course, Explorer was Microsoft's response to the consumer phenomenon of the web browser, many years ago. But Microsoft, in its core, is really an enterprise company, right? It's a company that services the software needs of very large organizations.
Yeah.
It has a consumer search business, distant number two, called Bing. But I don't think that's where it's going to use this technology going forward. It already has a large artificial intelligence practice and software practice that's integrated with its enterprise platform business, which broadly is lumped under the brand name Azure, right? Their cloud offering. Yeah. But I got to thinking, what was one of the things that's sort of frustrating about the internet at large is, number one, it is an almost infinite data set, right? There's just so much information. And number two, it's very hard to make arbitrary sort of executive decisions about how things should be, right? When you try to do that, you get into the content moderation problems, of the past few years that all the social media companies have had. So what's an environment where you can both have sort of a top-down mandate, a set of rules, and a structured set of data, right, that is meaningful? Well, that's the enterprise. That's a big company. It has lots and lots of data, way more data than they can manage, right? Wouldn't it be great if you could ask that data questions in a structured way, right? That's been the goal of what's known as the executive information system business, for ever since I've been covering technology for 35 years, right? And it's, I'm sorry, as far as I can tell, you still can't ask the enterprise any questions, right? But that Chat GPT interface is pretty interesting. And so I think it's possible that Microsoft, with that $1 billion they invested in OpenAI, could create a product that allows people to query their own enterprise data. And even more interestingly, query related data that partners might make available, right? So if you're United Airlines and Hertz, right, two big companies in the travel business, they might share their back-end consumer data, hopefully in a way that's, privacy compliant, and then ask questions of it in an interesting way that could help them do any number of things, from manage their supply chain to manage their marketing campaigns going forward. So I think that that's a big opportunity, and so that's my next prediction, is that Microsoft's going to take advantage of that and turn that into a licensing software licensing business that could get quite large.
I think Microsoft's listening, so let's see how that plays out. All right, I'm going to move away from AI to an area that you are semi an expert in, and I'm saying that obviously in a funny way because you're an incredible expert in this in advertising. So one of your next prediction is, and a few of them actually are talking about who you see as some of the big winners in advertising for 2023. And the first one you talk about is a duopoly war. I love that. So maybe we could talk about, you're talking about there's the new duopoly, and maybe you'll just, instead of me saying who it is, maybe you'll talk a little bit about who you're seeing that.
Of course, sure. So the duopoly that's really controlled digital advertising for the past 10 plus years is Facebook and Google, right? Both of them changed their names to Meta and Alphabet, but Facebook and Google have been the big winners of the past 10 years. But I think the big winner in the next 10 years could well be Apple and Amazon. Amazon has already really hit the radar of almost everybody in the advertising business, because in the past 5 years they've gone from sub $1 billion advertising business to $30+ billion advertising business. But Apple is about to do the same thing. And Apple's advertising business last year was reportedly around $4 billion. They were not breaking it out in their reporting yet. That's just exactly what Amazon did. They didn't break it out either. But once it gets over $5 billion, Wall Street wants to know about it. So next year is the year I think we're all going to realize that there's a new duopoly in town, Apple and Amazon. And the reason is that they are much closer to the customer, which is what matters to advertisers, than Google and Facebook are, right? You say, wait a minute, how much closer can you be than Google search or Google's Chrome browser or Gmail, right? Well, you could literally be as close as the piece of glass in someone's hand and the operating system, that's Apple, or what they buy, which is what really matters in commerce and capitalism, which is Amazon. And this also is a big phenomenon that's sort of a subpart of this advertising related prediction, which is the rise of retail networks, right? Retail media networks, where large retailers like Target or Carrefour, Walmart, they've already built these retail advertising networks. But the granddaddy of them all is really Amazon. And when you think about it, who knows everything about you, even though they call themselves a privacy company? It's Apple. So those are two to watch. And I predict there's going to be some big, big fights between the old duopoly and the new duopoly.
And then another winner, which I'm going to let you say who you think it is, was, I thought, interesting because they had a little bit of a stumble. Like the media definitely kind of like gave them a stumble. There was some, news around them last year that was like, uh-oh. But you actually think 2023 is going to be a big year for them for win in terms of advertising. So why don't you tell us who that is?
Yep, that would be Netflix, Lauren. And Netflix did have kind of a less than great launch of their advertising business. Of course, this is the company that said they would never do advertising ever. And this is the company that CMOs have been just, very eager to partner with ever since they realized that Netflix equated with an entirely new consumer behavior. Of course, all advertisers want to do is follow consumers' behavior. And when streaming became something that was obvious and seemingly irreversible, advertisers wanted to be there, but almost all the other streaming networks were not at scale. Netflix was at scale, but did not take advertising. Then, of course, growth started to slow, and the company last year announced that they would launch an advertising business, and they did. And by the end of the year, it was kind of universally, declared a dud. So my prediction for this year is that, in fact, it will not be a dud by the end of the year because there's too many smart people working on the problem and they're far too motivated. And it is still an open field, and oftentimes a smart company with really smart executives from the advertising industry who are very motivated to solve a problem on behalf of the advertisers, I say their chances of success are pretty high.
Well, that's going to be another good one to watch. All right, so we're going to get off advertising. That's one of your favorite topics, but let's move into something that I know a lot of investors are going to be interested in. Not that you're going to be predicting any of that necessarily, yes or no, but there were two areas here that you really did touch on. And one is, one of the big hot stories for a number of years now, which has been crypto. You
Right.
have a prediction about crypto for 2023. Let's definitely jump right into that.
Yeah, crypto got the blackest of black eyes in 2022. It started the year off as super hot. Everybody wanted in. Everyone wanted to buy an NFT and make a bunch of money. And then the end of the year, it was like no one wanted to touch it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think either of those things are going to be true in 23. Where we are right now in crypto is that it's sort of lying on the ground, nose bloodied, barely has a pulse. I think that's where it's going to be at the end of the year. I think it's going to go sideways. I don't think there's going to be a run in the markets that's going to be sustained. I also don't think it's going to go away. I think in between now and the end of the year, there might be some pretty crazy roller coaster rides for anyone who is involved in the cryptocurrency marketplaces. But otherwise, it's going to be a year where the original folks who got into this business because they saw a new approach to managing data, those people are going to be building all year long. So there'll be some really interesting new projects and older projects that are, finally getting some of the features that make them valuable. But generally speaking, I wouldn't want to be a crypto investor this year.
Okay, that's very good to note. But you're definitely a little bit more upbeat on something that I think is going to be exciting for people who've been certainly watching this space for decades. You think it's going to be a good, very, very good year for
technology IPOs. It was a terrible year for tech IPOs this past year. And I think a lot of people are saying it's going to be another terrible year. But the fact is when you have a full year, and really a bit longer than that, where good companies that have solid businesses and strong backers and a lot of potential for growth, when they can't get out, asking them to not go public for 2 or 2.5 straight years is not good, right? And we don't forget we also had a pandemic prior to that. So There's a lot of pent-up demand, a lot of good companies. Valuations have been reset. Capital wants an exit, right? Capital likes liquidity. And so do the employees and founders of these companies. So I expect that by the end of the year, we'll see a lot of good technology IPOs, and they may well lead us out of a recession entirely.
Well, thanks so much, John, for giving us a kind of a roadmap to follow for 2023. I guess we'll check back in with you next year to see how we all kind of did on your predictions.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, it'll be great. Again, given your track record, these have a good tendency. I think we all have a good tendency to believe these might actually follow through. So thanks so much for joining us. It was fun to do this reversal and get to chance to interview you. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody also for joining us. Hope your New Year's off to a good start, and we'll see you guys soon.